Most people think they are underpaid because their salary is too small. I think a great many of them are underpaid because they have never audited the business they are actually running. The business is not their employer, the business is their life, and the ugliest number in that business is not revenue. It is margin. You look at a paycheck and you see a clean number, 45,000, 70,000, 90,000. Your brain treats that number as proof that you are moving forward. But that is the same kind of thinking that ruins bad companies. Revenue can rise while the enterprise rots. Sales can grow while the owner gets poorer. Cash can move faster while the machine quietly dies. I have watched that happen in business for decades. I have also watched ordinary people do it to themselves every week and call it a career. If you want the brutal truth, most workers are not running a high-quality enterprise. They are running a high-stress, low-margin operation with terrible overhead, shrinking free cash flow, and almost no control over pricing. They think the problem is that they need a raise. Often the real problem is that they are leaking their life through 10 small valves they never bothered to measure. That is why so many people feel a private shame every time they open their bank app. They are not lazy. They are not stupid. They are simply reading the wrong line on the statement. They keep staring at gross income while their real margin is collapsing in the dark. I want you to see how dangerous that mistake is. A man tells me he makes $30 an hour. He says it with the tone people use when they want to convince themselves they are doing fine. I do not argue with him. I ask a different question. How much of that $30 survives after taxes? Commuting, office clothes, convenience food, stress spending, dead time, unpaid preparation, emotional recovery, and the hours of your mind that the job still owns after you have technically left the building. Now the room changes because the ordinary worker is taught to count wages the way a foolish manager counts sales. They count what comes in before they count what it costs to produce it. In any real business, that is malpractice. In personal finance, it is considered normal. That is one of the most expensive cultural delusions in modern life. I have spent my whole life thinking about capital allocation. Where does each dollar go? What does it produce? What friction does it face? What hidden claim sits ahead of it in line? That same logic applies to your labor. Labor is not sacred just because it is exhausting. Labor must be measured like any other asset. It has an input, it has an output, it has decay, it has maintenance costs, it has opportunity cost. And if the spread between what it earns and what it consumes is thin, you are not building wealth. You are burning yourself to keep an income statement warm. The first hidden claim on your wage is obvious. Taxes arrive before gratitude. Federal tax, state tax, payroll tax. Everybody understands that much. But what people miss is that the government is only the first hand in the bowl. The second hand belongs to the job itself. I call this the margin drain. The margin drain is every dollar you spend only because the job exists in its current form. Not because you love the expense. Not because it makes your life better. Because the machine requires the sacrifice. Gas parking, train passes, tolls, tires, oil changes, car depreciation, dry cleaning, shoes you would never buy if nobody at work could see your feet, makeup you do not wear for joy. Lunch is purchased because your schedule has been stripped down so far that convenience starts masquerading as necessity. Coffee bought as fuel for meetings that should not exist. Childcare extensions because your boss believes 5 o'clock is a suggestion. Dog walkers, delivery apps, last-minute groceries, extra streaming, drinking, shopping, and weekend escapes designed to sedate a nervous system that spent the week under fluorescent pressure. That entire pile is not lifestyle. That pile is overhead. If you do not treat it like overhead, it will quietly eat your future one small bite at a time. The reason this matters is simple. A lot of workers are living inside an illusion created by gross salary. They believe they earn enough to afford the life around the job, when in truth the life around the job is the mechanism stripping the job of its value. They finance the car to reach the office. They order the food because the office stole the energy to cook. They buy the better apartment to recover from the office. They take the expensive vacation because the office made ordinary life feel unbearable. They tell themselves the job pays for the lifestyle. when the darker truth is that the lifestyle exists largely to anesthetize the damage of the job. That is not compensation. That is a self-licking ice cream cone. Now comes the part most people still do not count even after they start paying attention to money. Time, money divided by hours is wage. That sounds obvious until you realize almost nobody counts the real hours. They count the hours the company admits to owning. They do not count the grooming, the commuting, the mental loading before work, the emotional decompression after work, the dead lunch hour spent captive near the office, the Sunday dread, the evening email checking, the psychic residue that follows them home and sits at the dinner table before they do. I call that shadow labor. Shadow labor is all the time the job captures without formally paying for it. It is the half hour you spend getting presentable for a culture you did not invent. It is the drive in traffic where your body is in the car, but your future is not moving. It is the half-drained hour after work when you sit in your own house like a temporary guest, too tired to start your real life. It is the low-grade mental occupation that turns a nominal 40-hour job into a 55-hour claim on your week. Once you see shadow labor, a lot of promotions stop looking sexy. A promotion is often presented as victory because the salary line goes up, but if the raise comes with more commuting, more wardrobe inflation, more performance theater, more convenience spending, more family outsourcing, more recovery spending, and more cognitive occupation, the business you are running may actually get worse. Revenue rose, margin collapsed, the title improved, the enterprise deteriorated. That is how people wake up 10 years later with higher pay, higher blood pressure, higher recurring expenses, less freedom, and a deeply confusing sense that all their effort has somehow produced no meaningful ownership over their own life. They mistake scale for profit. I have seen companies die this way. I have seen people die this way too, just more slowly and with better office chairs. Let me give you a cleaner lens. Suppose two people each make a respectable income on paper. One makes $100,000 but needs almost all of it to sustain the machinery around the work. The other makes $50,000 but has low overhead, lower stress, more control, and real savings margin at the end of the month. Which one is wealthier? The first man has more motion. The second man has more retained power. I know which one I would rather own if they were businesses. Most people would not, because modern life worships throughput, more transactions, more subscriptions, more upgrades, more process status, more visible strain, more symbolic success. But wealth has never been about motion. Wealth is about retained optionality. It is about the gap between what comes in and what must go out. It is about having enough margin that you can say no without panicking. I have another name for that: refusal power. Refusal power is what appears when your margin gets wide enough that you do not need every dollar the machine offers. The man with no margin is obedient even when he calls himself ambitious. He cannot refuse the commute because the lease depends on it. He cannot refuse the late meeting because the car payment depends on it. He cannot refuse the promotion because his identity depends on the larger number and his expenses have been trained to expect it. He cannot refuse the pointless purchase because exhaustion has weakened judgment and he is starved for reward. The man with margin can refuse. And when you can refuse, the whole negotiation changes with your employer, with advertisers, with social pressure, with your own impulses. Margin is not just a financial number. It is psychological armor. That is why low-margin living does more damage than people realize. It is not just that the worker has less money left. It is that the worker slowly becomes more trainable, more suggestible, more dependent on convenience, more vulnerable to emotional spending, more willing to swap future freedom for present relief. A person with no margin starts making decisions like a drowning business. He cannot think clearly because every problem is urgent, and every urgent problem looks like permission to spend. This is how the invisible tax multiplies. The coffee is not just $5. It is the symptom of fatigue purchased to support the machine that caused the fatigue. The takeout is not just $45. It is outsourced life maintenance bought because the job consumed the energy that should have prepared the food in the first place. The weekend splurge is not just recreation. It is repair spending on a frayed nervous system. The nicer clothes are not just clothes. They are costume compliance. The bigger car is not transportation. It is a finance symbol required to sit in traffic with more dignity. When I say margin, I am not asking you to become austere for sport. I am asking you to stop confusing machine support costs with personal desire. People like to reduce wealth building to investment returns. Which stock, which fund, which entry point. I have made plenty of money in markets, but I can tell you something with great confidence. A weak margin destroys more households than a weak portfolio ever will. Before compounding can rescue you, margin has to stop the bleeding. You cannot outinvest a structurally wasteful life. You cannot compound money that your routine has already assigned to overhead. That is the part people do not want to hear, because it makes freedom feel less glamorous and more forensic. But the math does not care about your mood. Suppose your so-called real wage after taxes, work costs, and shadow labor is $10 an hour. Suddenly, the world looks different. A $100 purchase is not $100. It is 10 hours of your life, not 10 abstract hours, 10 hours of alarm clocks, traffic inboxes, performance recovery, and mental drag. That is the correct exchange rate. And once you start pricing life that way, a shocking amount of consumer temptation begins to look obscene. You do not need more budgeting apps. You need a harsher translator. You need to train your brain to convert every discretionary purchase into required life hours at your real wage. Not your fantasy wage. That pair of shoes is not $120. It is 12 hours. That delivery dinner is not $45. It is most of a workday. That impulsive upgrade to feel like you are finally doing well is not a treat. It is a slice of your remaining margin sold back to you in packaging. This is where many people get defensive, because they think I am attacking comfort. I am not attacking comfort. I am attacking counterfeit comfort. Real comfort comes from room to breathe. Counterfeit comfort comes from buying sedation while the underlying machine remains unchanged. One expands margin, the other rents numbness. If you keep renting numbness, you will stay impressed by the wrong numbers forever. The problem gets worse when society starts rewarding people for revenue theater. You will see a person with a good title, nice clothes, and a fuller calendar. And you assume progress. But many of those people are overcapitalized on appearance and undercapitalized on freedom. The market values them at one level. Their real retained earnings tell another story entirely. Their enterprise is fragile. It only looks strong because nobody audits the cost structure out loud. The most dangerous thing about a fragile life is that it usually remains socially respectable until the moment it breaks. Then the story changes all at once. Job loss becomes catastrophe because there is no retained cash. A medical bill becomes debt because there is no margin. A move becomes impossible because the entire expense structure is built around current employment. A bad manager becomes unendurable, but still cannot be challenged because the worker has been optimized for continuity, not independence. That is when people discover they were never earning security. They were renting it by the month. I do not like rented security. If you want a different life, you must stop worshiping income as the primary number. Income matters, but margin matters more. I would rather see a person making less money with strong free cash flow, low friction, and growing refusal power than a person making more money while serving a bloated system designed to absorb every raise. That is not a slogan. That is business logic. When I evaluate a company, I care about economics, incentives, and durability. You should evaluate your job the same way. What does it really leave you with? What behavior does it incentivize? Does it produce retained capital? Or does it produce recurring exhaustion? Does it make your life more resilient or more dependent? Does each additional dollar earned improve your margin, or does it simply trigger higher support costs? You may not like the answer. Good discomfort is useful when it points at a broken machine. Now let me push harder, because this is where most people stop too soon. Once they realize work has costs, they attack the obvious ones. Maybe they brown bag lunch. Maybe they cut the coffee runs. Maybe they cancel a few subscriptions. Fine. Better than nothing. But if you stop there, you are treating symptoms while protecting the system that caused them. The bigger wins usually come from structural changes. Can you live closer to where you work and buy back hours instead of square footage that only compensates for stress? Can you work remotely even part of the week and eliminate a chunk of shadow labor without reducing pay? Can you compress errands so the work week does not leak into every evening? Can you simplify your wardrobe so appearance, cost lose their emotional power? Can you meal prep not because it is virtuous, but because it cuts a recurring work tax? Can you switch roles, industries, or arrangements so the enterprise of your life keeps more of what it produces? Those are margin moves. Margin moves feel small to status-obsessed people because they often reduce visible drama rather than increase visible prestige. But that is exactly why they are powerful. They widen the spread quietly. They increase retained earnings without requiring a public performance. They turn your life from a high-revenue spectacle into a compounding machine. I like compounding machines, and margin is where compounding starts in a personal life. Every recurring dollar you no longer need to feed the machine becomes a worker for your future. Every hour of shadow labor you recover becomes deployable time. Every reduction in stress spending becomes capital. Every avoided upgrade becomes liquidity. Every simplification becomes a small increase in autonomy. None of these changes look heroic in a single week. Over years, they are the difference between a person who merely survives the labor market and a person who slowly buys his way out of compulsory dependence. That is another truth people resist. Freedom is usually purchased before it is declared. It does not arrive in a cinematic breakthrough. It arrives in widening margin, stubbornly protected month after month, until one day your life stops feeling like a machine that owns you. There is also a moral dimension to this that people rarely mention. A low-margin life steals from your best self, not just your retirement account. Your best self when all your surplus gets consumed by work support costs and emotional recovery. You have less patience, less curiosity, less courage, less ability to think long-term. You postpone learning, you postpone reading, you postpone health, you postpone relationships, you postpone the ventures that might actually change your trajectory. Margin is not only what funds investing, margin is what funds becoming. That is why the system is so dangerous. It convinces you that your life is too full for transformation, while quietly ensuring it stays that way. Exhausted people are easier to manage. Thin margins keep them compliant. Convenient spending keeps them sedated. Identity spending keeps them chasing validation. And all of it can hide beneath a paycheck large enough to make the whole arrangement look respectable. Respectable is one of the most expensive words in the language. I would rather be free than respectable. If you take one thing from me, take this. The market is not paying you what the offer letter says. The market is paying you what survives the entire machine. That number may be high enough to build a life. It may be embarrassingly low, but until you calculate it honestly, you are negotiating blind. I want you to stop negotiating blind. Sit down with a clear head, not Friday night when your brain is fried and the delivery app is whispering to you, not after a long day when you want permission to stay unconscious. Sit down when you can think like an owner, write down your stated income, then start subtracting every cost that exists because the job exists as currently structured. Taxes, commute, car wear, parking, office food, convenience spending, appearance, recovery spending, outsourced life maintenance, every single item. Then count the hours with equal honesty. The transit, the dead time, the decompression, the email residue, the mental occupation, the hours the machine captures, but never invoices. Now divide. That number is your truth. Maybe it will anger you. Good. Anger is useful when it is accurate. Maybe it will embarrass you. Better. Embarrassment is cheaper than denial. Maybe it will free you, because once you know the real number, you can start building against reality instead of fantasy. Then your next question changes. Not how do I look richer? Not how do I feel less stressed for one night. Not what stock should I buy while the machine still takes almost everything. The right question becomes, how do I widen my margin? Maybe you keep the same job but eliminate a third of the leakage. Maybe you change the arrangement. Maybe you move. Maybe you downshift your visible lifestyle so your invisible power can grow. Maybe you reject the promotion that fattens revenue and destroys margin. Maybe you finally understand that a lower status life with stronger free cash flow is not a step backward. It is a strategic retreat from a losing battlefield. I have made enough capital allocation decisions to tell you this without hesitation. The most dangerous investment many people ever make is the decision to keep financing a life whose economics do not work. They do it because it is familiar. They do it because everyone around them is doing the same thing. They do it because gross salary flatters the ego while real margin tells an unforgiving truth. Choose the unforgiving truth because the truth at least gives you a path. A flattering lie gives you a treadmill. At the end of all this, the test is not complicated. When you look at your current life as a business, is the margin widening or shrinking? Is your refusal power growing or fading? Are you converting labor into retained freedom? Or are you spending most of your life supporting the apparatus required to keep selling more of it? That is the door. On one side is the familiar script: ask for a little more, spend a little more, recover a little more, numb a little more. Grow revenue, lose margin. Repeat until age or crisis forces a reckoning. On the other side is a colder but better path. Audit the machine, cut the margin drain, expose the shadow labor, protect the spread, build refusal power. Let your life become a profitable enterprise before you ask it to become an impressive one. Most people will not choose that path because it requires them to see their paycheck as less flattering than they hoped. You do not need hope here. You need arithmetic. Arithmetic has more integrity than your excuses. So make the choice. Keep defending a business model where you are the inventory, the labor, the customer, and the casualty, or become the owner.